உலகெங்கும் தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.
Hello and welcome to CrossRoads. I'm Sudarsha Ignatius. Be the change you want to see in the world. Some golden words once said by Mahatma Gandhi. In today's show, we are going to be examining our sense of belonging, relationships to our communities, and our contributions to a healthy democracy. Regardless of our individual goals and dreams, we live in communities. Community engagement transforms both communities and people in it. In taking a look at our civic duty, I'm here joined by three fantastic guests. They are passionate about giving back to their communities, so we're hoping to have a spirited discussion today. Let me introduce them. Sumi Shan, from my right, is currently a public affairs professional with the Heart and Stroke Foundation and owner of Niche Strategies, a boutique consulting firm specializing in public affairs and communications. A social profit doer, she has managed the strategic development and implementation of successful public awareness campaigns as well as political campaigns. She was a former senior political advisor with the Ontario government. Recently, she was the Scarborough-Markham regional lead for the Justin Trudeau leadership. Sumi Shan also holds a Bachelor BA honors in political science from the University of Guelph. Great achievements.
Thank you.
Welcome to
Thank
CrossRoads,
you for
Sumi.
having me here.
Welcome. Up next, again, he's not a stranger to the community either. Needan Shan, who currently works as the Executive Director of Council of Agencies serving South Asians. As the first South Asian and the youngest public school trustee, Needan Shan also represented a very diverse population in Markham in York Region District School Board. Needan was elected as the President of Ontario New Democratic Party in 2012, the first person of color to serve in that role. Needan graduated from University of Toronto with Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Education. He is currently pursuing an MA degree at UFT in the field of Sociology and Equity Studies in Education. You inspire a lot of young people, Needan. Welcome to CrossRoads.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Last but not least, Kevin Lee has been Executive Director at Scadding Court Community Center for the last 15 years. He has worked for over 25 years in the nonprofit sector, including St. Stephen's Community House and University Settlement Recreational Center. His work with newcomers and low-income, diverse, marginalized communities focuses on poverty, anti-racism, and healthcare access and equity issues. Kevin was instrumental in developing and coordinating programs to help disadvantaged and alienated youth, including investing in our diversity, a scholarship program developed with Toronto Community Housing to help disadvantaged youth continue their post-secondary studies. Welcome to CrossRoads. I know you had a list of other activities, your involvement in the community. We don't have time, so we're going to leave it with that. Thank you so much to all of you. I'm going to start off with a personal note. When it comes to, speak about civic engagement and engaging in the community, our personal statement speaks volume. And for all of you to be where you are right now, you went through a journey with a lot of struggles, a lot of hard work and commitment. So I'm going to start off with you, Kevin. What does civic engagement mean to you?
Well, I think what civic engagement really is the opportunity, but not just the opportunity, but it's also the right, okay, in terms of determining and participating in decisions in the wider community as how it affects your life. And we'll get into it more, but I think the economic issues certainly play a big part in it. Just as a case in point, when we immigrated to Canada, my mother, who immigrated here with us, could not civically engage because she was, working until 3 a.m. in the morning, doing piecework for 3 cents a piece, but ensured that her children got engaged and had the opportunities to be part of the community. So I think it's not just a luxury, it should be a right that all members of our society and the immigrant and diverse communities have that opportunity opportunity to participate in the destiny of how their community is going to form and function.
Absolutely. We are going to talk about barriers and some of the roles as well. Neithan, you exemplified civic engagement through various activities in the community. So what does it mean to you?
Well, I think it's taking ownership of things that are happening around us. Civic engagement means, there are political processes that happen, there's economic process, what kind of job, what kind of pay, where do we work, how safe it is, politically, what gets decided for us, whether it's internationally or locally, cultural and social, around how I'm treated, how my diverse lenses of identity is treated. So all these things are shaped by things around us, and if we take ownership of it through being involved politically in terms of capital P politics, political party, or being involved in a community organizations, being involved in the neighborhood, doing something with the neighbors, all those things are part of the civic engagement process. And I think though we would like all of us to be civically engaged, most of the time it's not just the onus is on the individual, because a lot of the time many people who want to be involved face multiple barriers, and we'll talk about barriers. So, but at the bottom line is taking ownership of processes around me and trying to change it. Also not fitting into what is already existing, but being able to shape it into something that I want it to be.
Okay. Definitely. The community, we live in communities, and it becomes when we decide how the community it's going to look like, right?
Yeah. It's the difference between being integration, you have a fixed model that exists there. Are we forced to just fit in and call that civic engagement, or am I being able to change it around so that it kind of makes sure that people who have diverse backgrounds can succeed?
Absolutely. Sumi, I don't want to sing loud, but as a woman, we've seen a lot of progress in terms of women's rights and all that. But it is an important dialogue that we have to have. And I know you've had a program on Kunkumam. You featured women's accomplishments. But we'll talk about that later. But yeah, from that perspective, as well as your involvement, it's slightly different. You're involved in a lot of political activities, not necessarily at the forefront. Shaping values and influencing policies. So what does civic engagement mean to you?
Civic engagement to me is exactly the quote that you started off with: be the change you want to see. Be part of the process, whether it's inside or outside, whether it's to, participate via the establishment or change the establishment, because I think as Neithan and Kevin said, there's a lot of changes that need to be made, and to be part of the process, be part of the dialogue, and not just be, but provide solutions, right? And that has been my role so far, is to how do we improve the civic engagement within Ontario and Canada, as we evolve as a community and a society here.
When we say civic engagement, it could be daunting some people, that terminology. The language is so important, right? So let's break it down. We're going to go more into discussion, but let's break it down and give some example of civic engagement, and also how does political engagement sort of overlaps with that. So under this overarching theme of civic engagement, engaging in civic life, what are some examples that you would say?
Well, I think the politics is, you can't run away from politics.
Yes.
The thing is, when I wake up in the morning, what kind of water supply I get, what kind of electricity bills I'm paying for the use I'm using, what kind of transit I'm able to take, the grid log to everything. If my son is going to daycare, the amount of fee I pay. A lot of these decisions are political decisions. So you can be involved at various levels, but ultimately politics is the key way to change processes around us. And so it overlaps, but it's also an overarching thing in countries like Canada, where politics is influenceable to a certain extent. But getting involved in a local community organizations, going out and participating in a market, community market, and supporting local community farmers or local artists and stuff like that. Those things are, a lot of the times many people think that we are not civically engaged as a Tamil community, but in fact if you count the number of hours we put into civic activities, cultural organization, faith-based cultural activities, social activities, we are contributing enormous amount of social capital into this country and for us. So sometimes it's it's defined in certain way, and people don't evaluate the kind of stuff that we do, because many of the times we are not filling out forms or tracking volunteer hours, but in fact the contribution that we do as a civically engaged communities, many racialized communities, not just Tamils, is many times undervalued. So I think there's so many examples in our households that we can talk about.
It's interesting you said that. Even buying products from local farmers market, that is getting involved in supporting our local farmers, right? Yeah, when I asked my husband, I hope he was half jokingly said that it's every 4 years you go and cast your votes. I hope, some of the ideologies are like that. That's what it's, we look at these larger scales and we say that's what is civic engagement, and that has nothing to do with us. But when we broke it down to like smaller steps, just being part of that community.
Yeah,
right?
being part of your parent-teachers council, or even going to meetings, or being part of consultations that are happening. And as Nathan said, as a community, we're always volunteering, right? Volunteerism is a huge thing in Ontario, and not just within our community. I think a lot of communities do it. It's not just the big, every 4 years you go to a vote, little things that you're doing, what you're saying to your teachers, what's being done by, the parent-teachers unions, or in your work environment, what you're doing there. Every little thing, it adds on to how we can make a better society, right? And being within that dialogue is what I believe to be civic engagement.
Absolutely.
I think in many ways it's easy for us all, in the situation that we are in, to say, everyone should get civically engaged. But I think we've got to look at the policies and the systems that are out there that are actually preventing, in many ways, civic engagement. That's preventing, the diverse communities to really participate, be it in the political process or in the community building process. And the point that I want to get across here is that some of this is based, a lot of it, I believe, is based on economics, your ability to participate. If you don't have a job, okay, and you came from wherever, India, Sri Lanka, whatever, with a teaching degree or with a doctor's degree, an engineer's degree, and you're unable to get access into our system here as a foreign trained professional, it's the economic livelihood. So without economic livelihood and living in poverty, for us to say come and participate doesn't mean anything. I think civic participation has to mean something for that individual in order for it to be relevant for them to come out and participate. And so I think, we...
Do you see a lot of that barriers in your work?
I think we see it all across the city. In this municipal election that's happening, everybody is talking about transit, okay, as the flavor of the election. But if you don't have $3 to drop into the TTC fare box, that issue of transit means nothing to you. So I think what we're really talking about is to start looking at providing equitable means to look at the issues of marginalization and poverty. What does that mean? In our society means creating jobs. We have a lot in our current government talking about entrepreneurship of immigrants, newcomers, and so forth. And that there are programs out there that'll help you put a business plan together and whatever. Then afterwards, when you try to practice your business, it's unaffordable in terms of the rent. So I think we've got to be looking at solutions to the issues of jobs and the solutions of good jobs in order to stimulate civic participation, which is a fundamental core of democracy. In terms of people to be able to participate. So I think that's missing.
Yeah, those are valid points. So I'm going to come to you. I know you said that earlier, providing solutions. I know that you're involved in politics as well. So this kind of dialogues, how often being brought up especially when behind the doors, not in the public discussions, debates, but behind the doors. Do you think that this being brought up, there is work is being done within the government? I mean, I don't want to particularly pinpoint one particular party, but in generally speaking, how do you look at it?
I think people are aware of it. I think people are trying. Are they trying their hardest? Have we fixed the problem? No. I think there is a lot to happen. I don't disagree with Kevin. I also believe that, in order for those topics to be heard and to be on the table, we need more folks that are experiencing it, vocalizing it as well, right? The problem is that, if you can afford to do it, you're sometimes at the table and you're providing certain solutions and so forth, but those solutions tend to be kind of in line with what your background is, or what your upbringing is, and may not necessarily communicate the message that I think Kevin is trying to communicate about the folks that are within a poverty level, and this is not the most important thing in their life. It's whether getting food on the table and getting to work is a thing. But at the same time, you want those folks to have a voice, to be able to say, hey, I want to be involved, but I don't have the time to be involved. I'm working 3 jobs, I mean, I'm here right now because my parents worked 3 jobs. I grew up in Rexdale. Most of my classmates are not the same level as I am. I was lucky because, even though it was hard, my parents very, felt, coming from the background that we did, that, we need to be engaged, and I can't say that things have totally changed, but to have, like, Nathan as the party president of the NDP, I mean, had you thought about it even 2-3 years, how many years ago, it would have been unheard of, right? I started off in politics 14 years ago. I was one of the first Tamil, young liberal staffers, and it's, it was a lot of little things that we did, that small steps, but at the same time, a lot more could be done. I've seen a lot of growth. I've seen a lot of folks in various communities put their name forward and be part of it. But we also have to provide an avenue for those who don't have the same privileges as we've had, or the means, to be able to voice that. And yes, I think everybody has to do a better job at it. But it's not just one responsibility, one group's responsibility. I think it's a collective responsibility.
Just in terms of going back to the conversations, whether it's happening behind the doors or not, I think there's a hierarchy of hierarchy placed. A lot of people are willing to talk about economics per se in isolation, but don't want to talk about social factors of marginalizing on economy, whether it's gender-based, sexist or racist policies, or exclusion that leads to more women being working for minimum wage, or more racialized people. So those kind of layered discussions aren't happening at any political. They're happening. If it's happening, it's happening at an isolated way. It's not being incorporated into policy. The activists that are doing this work are also doing it in isolated ways. There are gender-based activism, there's economic-based activism. So that connectivity of people people of color who are women, who are fighting economic disparities aren't coming out. The other thing I want to mention is it's very right that Kevin talked about people who are fighting to make ends meet, but I think we have to change the definition of civic engagement to include the fights that they fight to survive as part of civic engagement. When somebody is fighting to make ends meet, they're fighting a system, and that fight itself, a woman fighting to work while daycare charges are so high, and making that process is part of making a change. So sometimes we have this language from a top-down perspective where we think they're not civically engaged, or we think they're not making a contribution. Every fight that they're fighting, it's more than person who's advocating. These people who are fighting those fights on the ground need to be acknowledged. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we are probably always going to have this 2-tier ways in which there are people who talk about it and there are people who experience it. And how do we come together is an interesting place for many progressives to be in.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot more. It's going very interesting, and a lot more to discuss. We do have some more time, but we have to go for a break right now. So stay with the thought, stay with us for more discussion on civic engagement and a healthy democracy. We'll see you after a break. Welcome back. You're watching Crossroads. I'm Sudashi Ignatius. I just want to start off with this quotation. Democracy becomes real for people when they decide what kind of community they want. In today's show, we are discussing healthy democracy and our contributions to civic life. I'm here joined by three fantastic guests, Sumi Shan, Neith and Sean, by the way, they are not siblings, and Kevin Lee. Thank you, and we're going to continue where we left off before the break. I know when you were saying about these dialogues, you said sometimes it's happening in isolations, but in-depth discussion as to why there are these barriers, not much happening. I know it's a hard question to, I'm putting you on the spot, but why is it? Is it because we are uncomfortable to talk about these things?
I think so. I mean, most of us, including myself, there are certain privileges we enjoy, and when we want to talk about those privileges as a male, a certain privilege as an able-bodied person, certain privileges as somebody who came to Canada a longer period of time. So we sometimes, unfortunately, we are not opening up our biases or our positions to talk about it. And if you take my personal example to a system, the system is treats system like a person, because it's so much things ingrained in it. It also does that same resistance. And so sometimes the conversations aren't happening at the level when we need to talk about root causes, when we need to talk about historic disadvantages of people. Why are people migrating from all parts of the world for minimum wage here? Why are there so many wars? Why are there issues in when our children grow up in the school system here, thinking that they have to somehow grow up to save Africa, they are actually not being taught that major part of the wealth every year is being shipped out of Africa to these countries, and you're giving back percentage of it as a charity. And so those contexts and conversations, people are uncomfortable because they don't want to acknowledge the truth. And I think
can we change
that's a difficult process, and the fault is also on the activist side. There's a lot of blaming that goes on instead of having constructive conversations where we can bring people on some sort of a wavelength to have those conversations. So it's not all bad. It's improved from where we were. I mean, we've had an amazing World Pride here, which is unthought of in many parts of the world, and we have diverse communities participating in it. So there are progress that's being made. My only worry is sometimes we find these progresses and point to it and be happy and complacent. And while we are doing that, there are so many people who are falling through the cracks because of systemic issues. So the speed at which we are transforming ourselves need to change. There are people who have privilege, whether it's white people, whether it's heterosexual people, whether it's men. They have to acknowledge their privileges and their social locations and how they implicitly use it to advance themselves. And when that conversation is real and legit, we'll be making progress.
So we need to change the language, definitely, right, to be more inclusive and more push.
Yeah, and to step back when you have to, right?
Yes.
And let others lead.
Yes. Kevin, I know you mentioned about socioeconomic barriers. That's and I know I've read your bio and a lot of the work you do, and you have special interest in removing those barriers.
Yeah, let me give you a very concrete example, right, of how things can be done in a small way from an economic perspective, right, in terms of getting people back into the economic life of a community. At Scanning Court, what we've done is that we've taken used shipping containers and we've modified them into a marketplace, which is right on Dundas Street. So it animated a street which was dead, which was desolate and so forth. It has created 17 stalls for newcomers, young people, people on pensions that cannot retire because you cannot live on Social Security alone with the cost of rent and everything in our city. So we rent them out for people to start up businesses for between $11 to $26 a day, all right, for people to get a business going and be able to be part of that community conversation, that community interaction, where they are part of the community. Where in our marketplace, it's also used as a medium for civic engagement. So we've had TED Talks on the immigrant there. We've had, different bands from different cultural groups come and perform, and all kinds of street food for engagement, and also for our vendors to make a living. And it's been going on now for 4 years, and it's our premise is not to be reliant on government dollars in order for sustainability. Those folks who then are no longer unemployed or no longer on OW, I think then become active participants in building a community and showing and demonstrating the possibilities that are out there in this country. But however, I think there are systemic barriers for public engagement and participation. You could see this when we look at the makeup of council. You could see this when we look at the makeup of our MPPs and MPs in this country. Like in Toronto, our city council is not reflective of what the makeup of Toronto is from a diversity viewpoint. And I think that has to change, because if it does change, it's actually going to contribute to a building of a better city and a better country. That, there's no going back, folks. Diversity and inclusion of other cultures, there's no going back. So as the way we move forward is to be able to see, used to being politically active and wanting to engage. And I think that type of leadership, that type of example is what our young people need, but not just our young people, but the seniors in our community has to see young people like used to are able to, lead not just the community that you're from, but in terms of to participate in that leadership of how we build a better city and a better country.
I think it comes down to, two things. One, it's on individual. You talked about the makeup of council, but that is an individual, our desire to put our name out and run for it, right? But then again, are there enough opportunities and programs for people who are marginalized and on the poverty line to be able to engage in this? So it's back and forth discussions. I just want to ask you about your agency. It seems like now, he gave an example of an agency taking that responsibility. So rather than just waiting for the government, I guess other stakeholders, entities also have to sort of step in. I know you've part CASA, right? Yeah. Give us some examples of the work that you're doing.
Well,
there.
CASA is maybe a bad example for this, because our work is try to influence government.
Okay.
But we try to influence government by local grassroots organizing. So if it's a child care advocacy, we make sure that we get women who are experiencing it trained and do lobbying to make sure that legal changes take place. We organize around racism, against hate crimes and stuff like that. We organize against poverty for increasing the minimum wage and stuff like that. So we make sure that we act as a link between the people and the organizing on the ground to having policy change through research, through organizing, through training people. So it's that role. But there are other organizations that do frontline. We are an umbrella organization. We have about 100 member agencies, and our member agencies do the work on the local level, on the front line. We do more scaling up of the effort to have policy change. So it's a bit of a conduit between the thing. But going back to what we can do technically without relying on government is the local democracies aren't run by government. We run it ourselves. Our neighborhoods are run by ourselves. Our community associations and stuff like that. There are a lot of things that we run ourselves, and we can influence those processes in many ways to make sure that they are democratic to begin with. You take a whole bunch of our organizations and look at how reflective they are of the diversity within our own communities in terms of gender, in terms of age, and so on, right? There's so much work to be done within our... So once we start to model it in our smaller organization, it starts to kind of get into the higher... It's like building blocks, right? So if you don't believe in it in your local organizations, how do you expect the government to change, right? So those are things that I would say as locally there's a lot of stuff that we do.
How about, so yes, we talked about governments and agencies and community organizations. Business sector, do you think that they have a role to play in this, perhaps?
Oh, definitely. I think everybody has a role to play. You shouldn't assume that government is the only influence or an active agent of change. I think community, of course, has it, and as businesses, a lot of businesses are doing a lot of corporate social responsibility initiatives, and it's an opportunity for the community to be involved in that, and to have a partnership with government as well. You know, a business is doing whatever level of business it is in the community. They're making money off the consumers in that community, but they also have I believe a responsibility to give back to that community. You know, a lot bigger corporations are probably doing it more so than smaller corporations. But now that we in our discussion about social enterprises and social innovation, smaller ones are giving back. There are companies whose focus is on being able to not only earn the profit, but also provide some benefit to the community, right? And when we're making consumer choices, that's our opportunity to be part of that. You know, if we ask our corporations, say, okay, I'm buying this from you, but what else are you doing, right? You know, where are your materials coming from, and, you know, and so forth.
I think the most important thing the businesses can do is pay their staff well, and give them proper benefits before they, you pay them less money that they can afford to live, and then you take a bunch of kids to camp and say that is social responsibility. I think it's hypocritical. Many of the bigger ones are the ones that are not giving their staff enough, health support, training, and stuff like that. So I think I agree with you. They have to have a social responsibility. I know you don't disagree with me as well. But I think the real social responsibility is to make sure the living conditions because those people have families. They go into a home, and as Kevin mentioned, once their security is fine in terms of job and income, they can get involved more. So I think many of the corporations that are trying to do one thing inside their staffing and then do another thing in the public relations war, I would call it war, that becomes a hypocritical thing. So there's a lot of work that the corporate sector can do. Yeah.
I just want to pick up on this. Over the last 20 years, government has been doing less and less. And I think what's happened is that there has been an acceptance from the population, okay, of that it's okay for government to do less and less. Partly, I think, has to do with, as from certain sectors saying, well, that's the economic reality. It's also partly because of where the immigration has been coming from, where those home countries, the government have been doing nothing. So it's not something that, they're expecting anyways. So I think that's why there's an acceptance of governments doing less and less. As to the private business corporations of what their role is, I don't believe that their role is to take over where government has been negligent or not doing their duties. I don't think the private sector should be expected to pick that up. I think where the third leg it should be developing is along the lines of what you're talking about around civic engagement and participation is the community. I think needs to start.
So are they part of the community?
Sorry?
The business sector, aren't they also part of that community we are talking about?
They are, but I'm talking more about in terms of the community from the indigenous level of within a community, of who actually lives in that community, be it, in Thorncliffe or Malvern or Regent Park, wherever, right? The corporations don't live there, but I think they have a responsibility and they have a part in it as government do. And I think that the new model that needs to be figured out is how do we create opportunities and conditions where communities can be that third leg, right? Within a tripartite model of addressing well-being, and how do we continue to grow and create viable communities. I don't think it's just reliant on any one sector, be it government, business, I think.
So I think we have to be very careful where the private sector. I'm not paranoid, but I think, say for education, it's a public education system.
Yes.
If we get private sector to invest into education, they're going to invest in areas where there's buying capacity of the people is higher. So richer neighborhoods would get more of an investment, whereas smaller neighborhoods. So in terms of, for example, hiring immigrants, that's the partnership that private sector can come in. Because you can actually come up with negotiation, come up with acknowledging the credentials and all those other things, and have a way in which training programs can be set up, because it's a win-win situation for the private sector. But when public good like healthcare and education and transportation like 407, the private sector gets involved, it becomes a barrier for people who live in the York region know that that's their highway, but they have to pay a huge lot of money to go through that. So I think it's carefully crafted ways in which the private sector can actually
roles and
responsibilities are decided. Then it's a mutually beneficial thing. I'm sure the businesses are made up of people, especially small businesses are just like many of us. Many small businesses actually don't take more money than many of the other professionals who are working, because they have full family working 12 hours, and then when you divide up the money. So I'm not saying this is just definitely against the businesses, but I think we have to be able to balance the need of the public. That's not decided based on profit at the end of the day when it comes to healthcare, education, and other things.
So we need everybody participating, but as both Nathan and Kevin are, there's checks and balances towards it, and as to what outweighs what, and that's a dialogue that we need to have. And I think going back to your earlier question as to what more can we do to ensure that we're not working in isolations, that we ensure that businesses aren't taking advantages of their work in their community to up their PR, or to that the government is not lagging behind, or allowing somebody else, the businesses, take over where they should be contributing. Is make sure that everybody's at the table, and it's to be able to provide that opportunity to have that table, because we're all working in isolations, but if we come together, regardless of our differences of opinion, if we're sitting at the table and we're talking to each other, it's a first step.
Absolutely.
I know it's not the end, but at least let's start somewhere, right? And some folks are always like, just having people at the table is not necessarily, going to change anything, but we need to start somewhere.
Probably you have several meetings, talks, and
But we do need to start somewhere.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, and then one example I read, it's actually it's a true example, but I don't know the background details, but someone who was in a fashion industry started up a particular line of clothing for women who are disadvantaged from First Nations community. And they, pretty much included them into the business, and it was created just for them. So there we are talking about businesses or the private entities taking ownership and strengthening the communities, right? All right, so I know we're talking about sort of impossible, it's too much for us, it's overwhelming. Let's give people some hope. Right, so I'm going to.
You mean to say we weren't given hope all this time?
We were giving, but with some doubts. So let's talk about. I want you to travel back in time, because again, as I said, to be where you are right now, there was a starting point. You've decided, I'm going to give back to the community. I'm going to get involved in this community. So what inspired? And just give us some, fill us in with some examples at that time, that experience, and some of the struggles probably you faced in the very beginning when you tried to get involved in the community and to make changes. So, so your interest in politics.
My interest in politics.
Yes.
I grew up with a very politically engaged family. From when I was very young. I mean, considering where we've come from. My father was quite engaged, and both my parents, regardless of the fact that I'm a daughter, they felt that shouldn't be a hindrance, especially considering in that time, like we were talking, there's not a lot of females in politics and so forth, right? So I was lucky enough, regardless of our situation, to be told, you're allowed to question, you're allowed to ask, read more. I was exposed to a lot, I think because of who my parents are. and they're wanting to ensure that I had a broader education and that I was exposed to everything, different views, regardless of whether it's right or not. So I grew up in such an environment, so that helped me build on that and get more involved as a young student. As mentioned, I was more involved with the liberals, so I got involved with the liberals when I was in university. But I mean, my first liberal event was like in '93 with John Chrétien, and I was like in like 8th grade or something, aging myself. But that was great, especially considering I was growing up in Rexdale. Our family background as coming from a war-torn country. Where people say, well, we were being disenfranchised, which is why we're here. As a young kid, I was able to be part of that process, and I built on that, and I got involved when I was in university, and continued that, and as well as in community, work and so forth. But yes, as a young woman, I was told, why are you involved in politics? Only men get involved in politics. But I was lucky enough to have a lot of support.
Okay.
And, to have parents who, it doesn't matter if you're a woman or it doesn't matter where you're coming from. You should have all the opportunities, and you should fight for those opportunities,
All right, great. You were brave enough to
like
to
to
ignore
be
some of those discouraging comments.
Exactly.
So we're going to hear from you. Don't worry, we're going to hear from you, but we have to take a break first.
No worries.
So stay with us for more inspiring stories after a break. Welcome back. You're watching Crossroads. I'm Sudarshi Ignatius. In today's show, we're talking about our civic duty. So we heard from Sumi about the beginning, some of the struggles. So we're going to start off with where we left. So Neelan, what inspired you to get involved into the community?
Well, we were talking about hope and
Yeah.
being optimistic, but I don't know how much of that is going to come from my story. But I usually say this, but I came to Canada at the age of 16 as a refugee youth with my sister, who was only a couple of years older than me, technically an unaccompanied minor, with on social assistance, with challenges in language and culture shock and all those other things. And in 10 years, I was able to become a trustee of one of the largest school boards in Canada. And I could say this story in two ways. One, here's my success. If I can do it, you can do it too. But I always say, within that 10 years, I had to work at least four times harder than a white, middle-aged, English-speaking, born here individual, which meant my 10 years is equal to 40 years. I'm ready to retire if we calculate it that way, right? And it's important to acknowledge that. It's important to acknowledge that because people who are fighting barriers are fighting it at a high energy. You're investing a lot of time. You're putting a lot of strain on your health and all those other things. So I want to be optimistic for the young people out there, but I also want them to say, it's not going to be easy. My role has been to change it from 4 times to maybe to 3 times as hard or 2 times as hard, so somebody else can take the struggle further, right? But the reality is that we'll face barriers. I was told I'm too young to run for school board trustee. I don't have a family. I don't have children. Why would I run for school board trustee? I was told, not even after I got elected, people, when they looked at me, thought I was only representing the brown people of the riding, even though a white person is seen as reflective of being able to represent everybody, but a person of color gets elected, we're often seen as, this person is the. So these boxing of us and also stuff is real, and we need to kind of make sure that we tell people that. But at the same time, positive influences came from my parents, their upbringing, their social justice, sense of social justice, the war and the kind of social justice sense that came through that struggle. And then, when we were in organizations like CanTide, CTC, NCCT, those places where we hung out with people who are social justice minded, they give you positive reinforcement. So overall, there are things that keep us going, things that keep us fighting for the good cause. When I was in my high school, that was the time when we had newspaper headlines about Tamil gangs, and I lost a couple of my friends unfortunately to the situations, right? So those things made me angry, and I think I've been always going one step next level because I've been angry, and it's a kind of not the right place to be. But I also believe that if you're angry and if you know how to channel something, being angry is not a bad thing. You will be actually finding a way to do something about it. If you're completely happy, then there's no progress. So that's all I would.
Yeah. All great. So change is possible.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Change is here.
Yeah, change is here.
Coming. I can hear it. To quote
And by,
Arundhati.
and by the way, anger is a normal emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, and you're channeling it in a positive way, in a productive way, definitely. So, Kevin.
For me, in a nutshell, I think it has to do with family. I think it has to do with opportunities that are out in the community, which people need to know about in order to take advantage of. I came here as a immigrant with a single parent mother, and lived with our great-grandfather here. And we were, one of the first Chinese families in the city in many ways. So there's a whole other story there, but I want to just talk about in terms of what brought me to the point, the blessed point that I am in, is because of opportunities of having, a place to go to after school for a after 4 program. A place to go for a summer day camp, which was affordable, which taught me outdoor skills and how to work with kids and so forth. Those are opportunities that I'm not so sure if they are, as available now as it was back then. And it also has to do with, seeing the economic conditions that my mother was confronted with to raise, 6 children in Toronto. So I think it's those type of experiences. It's also my great-great-grandfather, okay, who was engaged in terms of within the Chinese community, politically and so forth, because there's a whole history in our family of coming to this country back in 1906. So I think it's all those opportunities that need to be in place, and this is where I think it's lacking now, because of complacency of communities and of individuals. Ensuring that the government, the people they elect, are accountable for those provisions in order to encourage people to engage. Without that engagement, I don't think I would be in the line of work that I am currently in.
Yeah.
So
I want to pick on very quickly. We have perhaps 2 minutes left. You all mentioned about families being a backbone and an inspiration. So how important it is, because for young people, they're our future. We always say that, how important the family playing a role in fostering a leadership and fostering that passion. Message to the families and
You want to
parents
do that
and
in 2
schools.
minutes? It's a show. It's a show in itself. I
Yes.
think the parents need to support their children in whatever field they're going into, if
Okay.
it's social justice, economic justice work, because unless they are happy, they're not going to be successful. You want to make sure at a certain age you can still continue to coach and mentor and shape, but after a while the young people can decide on their own and give them the freedom to choose. And if they make mistakes, they actually learn much better through those mistakes than us telling them not to do something.
And civic engagement, when it starts at home, it's a lot easier to do it outside as well, right? If you're always getting opposition as to why are you involved politically, or why are you doing this, or why are you involved in community work, or why are you volunteering because it's free time and you should be doing other things, all that negativity can impede on a person. But I think, to have that support at the family level, and then and the opportunities at both the community level, that synergy is great. And I think for all of us, we all have different stories, but that's been our backbone, and it's allowed us to grow.
Okay, great. Last words from Kevin.
I just think for families and the community to get involved, it's good karma.
Oh, good. Good. That's, well, on that note, we're going to be rolling up. I just want to leave you all with one quotation here. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Actually, it's from a kids movie, Lorax, the Lorax. I happen to. It's a great movie. So for anyone who's looking for some inspirations, watch that. Anyway, so on that note, thank you very much, all of you. I know you're all busy people, but thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to be signing off. If you want to participate online, visit us on Facebook. Send us your comments, questions, even suggestions for future topics that you want to be seen discussed right here on Crossroads. That's all I have for you today. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.
தரணியில் தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.